TIAN X Science is where science meets the unknown. And my name's TIAN. I'm from China.
Can you believe it? One of the most mysterious giant geoglyphs on Earth can only be seen in its true, complete form from the sky. This brings up a question that still baffles many today. How did an ancient civilization without airplanes know what their designs looked like from above? Could they have attempted to take to the skies long before Europeans invented the hot air balloon? In 1975, two researchers decided to test this hypothesis themselves, even willing to risk their lives to prove it. Early that morning in the Nazca Desert of Peru, thick smoke continuously rose from a fire trench as a massive 26-meter-tall hot air balloon slowly inflated. The entire balloon was hand-sewn using cotton cloth and natural fibers, materials that the ancient Nazca people natively possessed. Then, the supposedly impossible contraption actually took off. Named Condor I, it was co-built by British hot air balloon pilot Julian Knott and American explorer Jim Woodman. Their sole purpose was to prove that, theoretically, the Nazca people of 1,500 years ago could indeed have flown. That day, Condor I briefly reached an altitude of about 180 meters before plummeting in the strong desert winds. But shortly after, it ascended again, peaking at approximately 360 meters before finally landing completely. This experiment proved something astonishing. Humans were actually capable of flight, relying solely on ancient materials and fire. Therefore, the question was no longer whether the Nazca people could have done it, but whether mainstream archaeology was willing to admit they actually did. To understand why this is so mind-blowing, you first have to look at what actually exists in the Nazca Desert. The Nazca Lines span nearly 520 square kilometers across southern Peru, scattered with hundreds of perfectly straight lines extending for kilometers, alongside massive geometric patterns and biological totems. The wingspan of the Condor geoglyph is roughly 134 meters. The hummingbird measures nearly 91 meters from beak to tail, and the spider is about 46 meters long. What is truly incredible, however, is how shallow these patterns are. The ground's reddish, oxidized surface was merely scraped away by about 10 to 15 centimeters to reveal the lighter-colored soil beneath. Yet, such simple lines have been preserved in this hyper-arid desert for over 2,000 years. When standing on the ground, these patterns are practically invisible. You can only vaguely make out some shapes if you climb a nearby hill. But once you ascend beyond 150 meters in the air, they suddenly emerge in their entirety, like absurdly massive aerial totems. In 1927, archaeologist Toribio Mejia Chespe first rediscovered these lines in modern times. Later, German mathematician Maria Reich spent decades studying them, proposing a famous theory. These patterns might have functioned as an enormous astronomical calendar. Regardless of their true purpose, one undeniable fact remains. These designs are only truly breathtaking when viewed from above. It was precisely this fact that ultimately drew Jim Woodman deep into this desert. He began to suspect that the Nazca people might have genuinely taken to the sky. Another crucial clue supported his idea: the textile technology of the Nazca civilization. The fabrics they left behind are astonishingly fine. In fact, some weaving densities are hard to perfectly replicate even with modern industrial looms. More astonishingly, their colors remain vibrant after 1,500 years. Later, researchers discovered something even more bizarre at the Nazca civilization's Kawachi site: a massive piece of ancient textile, later dubbed the Great Cloth. Archaeologist William Duncan Strong discovered it there in 1952. It had been carefully folded and buried under a large mound. Not like trash, but something intentionally preserved. Its original length was likely close to 61 meters, requiring a loom over 5 meters wide to produce. The entire cloth is estimated to have used nearly 2.7 million meters of cotton thread, likely requiring an entire community working continuously for 5 years to complete. To this day, it remains one of the largest single pieces of textile ever discovered in the ancient Americas. But the question arises: why would a civilization expend such immense manpower to weave a gigantic piece of fabric, only to bury it underground forever? Mainstream archaeologies suggest might have merely been a religious ceremonial item, Woodman, however, proposed a bold alternative. This was not a ceremonial cloth at all, but the envelope of a hot air balloon. Its weight and material perfectly matched flight requirements. Concurrently, Woodman noticed that the motifs on many Nazca ceramics were highly peculiar. Some archaeologists believed those circular patterns were simply pods, seeds, or plants, but Woodman thought they looked more like balloon envelopes, secured by ropes. Some designs even featured elements resembling fire and smoke beneath them, whereas authentic plant motifs looked completely different. Therefore, Woodman argued these patterns were not plants at all, but schematics of some sort of flight apparatus. Additionally, numerous charred, circular pits were found in the desert. Archaeologists considered them merely ceremonial fire pits, but Woodman countered. If those were actually hot air balloon launch sites, what difference would they show after 500 years? Fire is still fire, and smoke still smoke. A ceremony sacrificing to the sky gods and the preparations for a balloon liftoff might have looked exactly the same. Woodman subsequently recruited British hot air balloon expert Julian Knott to test this theory. They built Condor I strictly using materials the ancient Nazca people would have possessed. The envelope was entirely sewn from cotton cloth. The basket was woven from reeds common to Lake Titicaca. The ropes were made of natural plant fibers, and even the fuel consisted of local, steady-burning desert hardwoods. The underlying principle was practically identical to when the French Montgolfier brothers invented the hot air balloon in 1783. Thick smoke enters the envelope, heating the air to create lift. On the early morning of November 28, 1975, they ignited the fire. The balloon slowly expanded, then rapidly accelerated. The cotton cloth grew taut, the basket lifted off the ground, and then it actually flew. In just 30 seconds, Condor I rose to an altitude of about 180 meters, ascending even faster than the duo had anticipated. But then, violent desert winds struck out of control, causing the balloon to tilt and plummet, eventually crashing into the desert and throwing both men out. However, because the basket had detached, the balloon, still filled with hot air, took off once again. This time it drifted to about 360 meters high, slowly floating across the desert before returning to the ground 18 minutes later. The entire process was chaotic, dangerous, and practically out of control. But one thing was undeniable: it flew. Julian Knott later recalled, "I haven't found any evidence proving the Nazca civilization actually flew, but without a doubt, they were fully capable of doing so." Given the environment of the Nazca Plateau, a reasonably constructed hot air balloon is sufficient to carry 1 or 2 adults into the air. The Nazca people possessed all the necessary materials, and the region's cool, dry, and stable early morning climate is exceptionally suitable for hot air ballooning. So, the question was no longer whether they could fly, but whether they actually did. In 1982, skeptic Joe Nickell set out to debunk the Nazca balloon theory by personally replicating a 134-meter-long condor geoglyph in a farm field in Kent, England. Using only wooden stakes, ropes, and lime, the entire process took him just 9 hours. Viewed from the air, this pattern looked almost identical to the Nazca Lines. His point was simple: humans can draw these patterns without needing a hot air balloon at all. The problem, however, is that he didn't explain another issue. Why would ancient people spend thousands of hours creating an art form that is almost impossible to fully comprehend while standing on the ground? Yes, standing on a nearby hill, you can see portions of the design, perhaps a wing or half a body. But it is only when you truly ascend into the high altitudes that these lines suddenly become whole. When viewed from 150 meters up, they are no longer just lines, but appear as actual creatures spreading their wings in flight. That distinction is profoundly obvious. Currently, mainstream archaeology believes that the Nazca Lines are primarily associated with religious rituals and water worship. Pilgrims would walk these routes to pray for rain. This explanation is highly plausible because many lines indeed converge near underground water sources, and numerous ceremonial ceramics have been found on site. In the desert, water is inherently the most sacred thing. But the question remains: why can't both theories coexist? History has actually long shown us that flight technology can sometimes truly be forgotten. In 1709, 74 years before the French Montgolfier brothers invented the hot air balloon, a Brazilian-born Portuguese priest named Bartolomeu de Gusmas successfully demonstrated a hot air balloon in front of the King of Portugal. This wasn't a sketch, nor a theory, but a hot air balloon that genuinely flew. The device was made of thick paper, with a ceramic bowl suspended underneath containing combustible material. On August 8, 1709, before King João V of Portugal and his nobles, Gusmão lit the fire, and the hot air balloon actually rose slowly toward the palace ceiling. The servants present were terrified, fearing the fire would burn down the entire palace, so they hurriedly knocked it down. But the key point is, it flew. The king was so astounded that he immediately granted Gusmão a patent and decreed that anyone attempting to copy the invention could be sentenced to death. Gusmão later planned to build a larger version capable of carrying passengers. But he died at the age of 38. Some say he died while fleeing the Inquisition, as many at the time viewed flight experiments as heresy. Consequently, his achievement was gradually forgotten by history. It wasn't until the Montgolfier brothers successfully took flight in 1783 that the title of hot air balloon inventors was officially awarded to the French. Yet, when French researchers later re-examined Gusmão's records, they discovered something very interesting. Historical documents mentioned that Gusmão's inspiration might have come from certain artifacts of the indigenous peoples of the New World. At that time, Portugal had already been colonizing Brazil for 2 full centuries. So the question is, what exactly did those explorers see over there? And Gusmão isn't the only example. Back in ancient China, around 220 AD or even earlier during the Warring States period, Zhuge Liang was already using sky lanterns. Kongming lanterns, small hot air balloons made of paper and bamboo, to transmit messages on the battlefield. If ancient Chinese people could use paper to achieve flight, why couldn't the Nazca people do the same? Especially considering they possessed far superior textile technology. There is a classic saying in archaeology: absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Because if hot air balloons truly existed, those items made of cloth and rope would likely have rotted away long ago, or even been intentionally burned after the ceremonies, naturally leaving no trace. But what we can confirm for certain is that the Nazca civilization possessed the capability to achieve all of this. They built underground aqueducts that still function today, practiced complex religious rituals, and organized massive labor forces to carve giant patterns into 520 square kilometers of desert. Most crucially, many of the designs they left behind only truly make sense when viewed from the sky. Even today, archaeologists continue to discover new Nazca geoglyphs. Using drones and AI technology, researchers have found a vast number of new patterns that were previously impossible to spot on foot, including warriors, creatures, and sacrificial scenes. This also implies that this desert may still harbor many secrets. In 2003, Julian Knott returned to Nazca and piloted an upgraded Condor II for aerial photography. This flight was much more stable than before. He later recalled that when the hot air balloon truly lifted off, those fragmented and abstract lines on the ground suddenly came alive all at once. He even posed a question: if no one could ever see these patterns from the air, why were they created? He gave a very interesting analogy. If Da Vinci could never step back to appreciate the full Mona Lisa, would he have still painted it? Imagine the Nazca Plateau in the early morning. Flames ignite, thick smoke rises, and a massive cotton balloon slowly inflates in the hot air. A priest climbs into a woven reed basket as the crowd gathers around. Then, the ropes are released, and the hot air balloon gently ascends into the sky. And in that moment, it might have been humanity's very first time looking down from the heavens at a world they had created. As to whether this scene ever truly happened, the desert has never provided an answer. The real question, perhaps, was never whether the Nazca people could fly, but rather why we are so resistant to believing that they actually did. And there you have it. The veil of mystery over the Nazca Desert may never be completely lifted, but it opens up an entirely new perspective on human history for us. The greatest lesson this story offers isn't just about whether ancient people flew, but how we perceive our own limitations. we should never underestimate the greatness and boundless ingenuity of our ancestors. Sometimes, the pride of modern humanity makes us hastily shut the door on imagination. As the classic archaeological saying goes, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. True science requires skepticism, but it also demands breakthrough thinking, daring to step outside conventional boundaries to view the world. It's that exact spirit of reaching higher, much like how the Nazca people might have borrowed the wings of the wind to touch the sky. Everything TIAN Science just shared is a synthesis and analysis of various perspectives, built upon the most daring hypotheses. But what matters most right now is, what do you think? Do you believe the Nazca people actually took to the skies thousands of years ago? Or is this all just a massive coincidence, fueled by the wild imagination of modern generations? Is it fact or fiction? Right or wrong? TIAN is genuinely curious to know your perspective. So please, drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And by the way, I am so curious to know where my amazing viewers are tuning in from today. Whether you're watching this from the US, Europe, Asia, or anywhere else on this beautiful planet, let TIAN know your location in the comments. Our connection transcends geographical borders, just as science bridges the present with the past. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to TIAN Science so we can continue to decode more fascinating mysteries together. Have an absolutely amazing day and always keep an open mind. See you in the next video.